Many of you are waking up right now to a sub $20 silver price with another huge paper smash in the early hours of the day. This follows the Fed speech and is a typical hit and run for these banksters, especially during the seasonal summer doldrums of silver. They want no alternative for their almighty dollar and will use every trick in the book to break this resistance. That being said, here are 11 things to keep in mind about silver right now. Number 1, this is all paper manipulation. There is no massive physical dump of metal onto the markets. In fact, it's quite the opposite, as I'll point out in this video. This is purely a high-frequency traded in very illiquid markets to cause a waterfall price effect in the paper markets. Does a $52 dump in the trillion-dollar gold market make any sense when almost half of the gold in the COMEX is gone just over the past few weeks? It does if those that are taking delivery, knowing that massive change is coming, want you to dump your metal cheap too. Short the paper, take the physical.
Leave the gun. Technical knowledge.
We live in a world where electrons control so many people's perceived reality. Whether it is the boob tube or the flashing ticker of the markets, those in power know, like the Wizard of Oz, that if they pull a few levers that they can strike great and powerful fear into the masses. This is necessary to fool those individuals into sacrificing themselves to that power. The weak hands sell to the strong hands. The story is never who's selling, it is always who's buying. Number 2. The U.S. Mint's Silver Eagle sales are still at a record pace to do 50 million ounces of silver this year. So far this year they've sold 24.2 million ounces of silver with a week left in the month. And with this latest smash in silver price, I'm sure this pace will even go even higher. This will probably lead to the U.S. Mint shutting down sales again and premiums for those that have silver to go higher. To put this 24.2 million ounces of silver sold in the first 6 months of this year, last year alone, the U.S. Mint only sold 33 million ounces the entire year. And the biggest year they ever had was 40 million ounces in 2011. Number 3. But the Silver Eagles are not necessarily being sold to Americans. As I prepare for the relaunch of the Silver Bullet Silver Shield series with my new Warbird and Love designs, I have the pleasure of speaking to many of the real market makers out there, and I can tell you a huge part of the demand for this record pace in Silver Eagle sales is coming from overseas. Silver sales are good here, but nowhere near the feverish pace that we had in 2011. There is a huge surge from foreign buyers of silver, and that is accounting for much of this demand. The historic silver bull run of the 70s was only created by Americans and Western Europeans. This time around, the world is going to join in, and in a big way. There are literally trillions of dollars floating around the world, and these nations know that it's not a fair economic system to be tied to the petrodollar. That is why nations like China, Russia, Japan, Australia, and many more are dumping the dollar in bilateral trade, and they no longer need to hold these reserves. The world is going to see that the only currencies that have no counterparty risk are precious metals, and they're taking delivery. Number 4. 16% of domestic silver production was destroyed with the Kennecott mine collapse in April. The United States only produces about 40 million ounces of silver a year, and an estimated 5 million of that came from the Kennecott mine in Utah, and that is now buried in 165 million tons of rock. So since the U.S. Mint must only use domestic mine production for this Silver Eagle program, we will use every ounce that the entire country produces just for these coins. And forget about the thousands of uses of industrial silver or the privately minted coins. There is now a huge gash in the American silver productive capacity with the Kennecott mine collapse. Number 5. These lower paper prices are not going to bring on more production. The true cost of mining silver is actually much higher when you use real cash costs. The miners are not going to produce only to sell at a loss. They will simply either not produce, hold for higher prices, or go out of business. Which again might be part of the plan. If you're logical, this may be part of the plan to buy these assets on the cheap before the collapse of the dollar. Number 6. We've been here before. I sat through the grueling 2008 silver collapse, and I listened to all the silver naysayers bash silver back then, and they're once again fluffing their feathers. They say that silver's done and you should sell. And I always ask them, what would you do with your money then? And very little come back with any answers that make any sense. You cannot be safe even in cash with these highly leveraged banks and counterparty risk of a dollar collapse. You cannot be safe in the stock market with it at record levels and flash crashes. Even in real estate, with these ridiculously low 30-year interest rates, that would destroy any equity that people have when either the economy and or interest rates spike. We will never know the day that the music stops, and those that trade in and out of the market risk being caught on the wrong side of history. I stack because I've read the end of this drama, and those with real friends, real assets, and real skills will thrive. The silver bashers never offer any logical arguments on where they would put their money, which leads me to believe that the majority of them are just paid shills. And the ones that actually predicted this criminal manipulation of these markets to these levels are probably even more guilty of being closer to the heart of the debt and death paradigm than they would like to admit. I believe that many of these guys are simply trying to gain credibility with their insider knowledge, only to be the Pied Piper leading those followers astray at the most critical moment. That is why I say listen to all and follow none. The biggest money, historically, has not been chasing trends, but seeing where the world is going and buying right and sit tight. It is not sexy, but it works. In 2008, I was determined not to be emotionally pushed around and use logic that I presented in the Silver Bullet, Silver Shield series to hold firm and actually buy more. Thank God I did, because I watched silver rise almost 500% from 2008 to 2011. Number 7. Silver is still way below the nominal price of $50 that it set in 1980. It is even further below than the government inflation-adjusted numbers of $135. And if you use real inflation-adjusted numbers like that as shadow stats, the real 1980 inflation-adjusted price of silver would have to get to $450. Silver is a precious and depleting resource, and when you look at the price of housing, cars, education, food, energy, taxes, and insurance back in the 1980s, it is insane to think that silver is so cheap on any level, especially when the uses of silver have skyrocketed since 1980, and the whole world's economy has opened up since then. It is now used in technology on a massive scale, and is now even being said to cure cancer. Heck, they didn't even have a Silver Eagle program back then, or the Silver Bullet and Silver Shield for that matter. Number 8. This time it's going to be much larger. None of the problems from the 2008 banking crisis have been solved. In fact, its magnitude's worse. What started out as an institutional problem is now a sovereign nation problem. This collapse will not be a puny multi-billion-dollar corporation like AIG. It will be the trillion-dollar economies of the nations of the world and the quadrillion-dollar derivative market that dwarfs them all. There is not any financial, political, or social safety net left. We destroyed all of that in 2008, and we are on a debt-based junkie delusion right now. The collapse of the currencies will affect every counterparty, debt-based asset in the world. Your cash, stocks, bonds, real estate, pensions, insurance, all of it. The collapse of the financial markets will lead to the collapse of all political and social contracts. The anger phase of humanity is coming, and only the real assets with no counterparty risk will be worth anything. As you know, most commodities have storage or degradation issues, leaving only precious metals as a real store of wealth. Number 9. The 1 to 65 gold to silver ratio makes silver the only choice. The current gold to silver ratio is 1 ounce of gold is worth 65 ounces of silver. It only comes out of the ground at a 1 to 9 ratio. So that means in order to get back to the natural mining ratio, or reality, silver would have to outperform gold by 500%. This is regardless of what happens to the dollar value of gold. Gold could feasibly go to $13,000 an ounce, and silver at a 1 to 9 gold to silver ratio, that would make silver at $1,444 silver. Number 10. The historical stockpiles of silver are destroyed. We know implicitly that gold has been treasured and kept secure, while silver has been used and abused as a cheap industrial metal like tin. Since the price of silver has been under attack since the crime of 1873, silver has been used in such small quantities that it has literally been destroyed. The fact is, the United States government in 1950 had 5 billion ounces of silver in their strategic stockpile. Now it is 0. So if gold and silver come out of the ground at a 1 to 9 gold to silver ratio, and gold has been treasured and silver stockpiles have been destroyed, logic would dictate that at the end of this silver bull market, we will find the gold to silver ratio below 1 to 9, and I think it will come very close to a 1 to 1 gold to silver ratio. Either way, we're a very long way away from those levels, which makes silver so exciting right now. It is the destruction of these huge stockpiles that explains the decade-long supply deficit to the growing silver demand. Do not forget, we're only 7 years away from the United States Geological Survey's prediction that if we continue to consume silver at these rates, silver will be the first metal to become extinct by 2020. When I challenged the USGS on that statement, they said only a massive revaluation of silver to bring on more production and wiser use of silver would stop that extinction. I don't think we'll ever run out of silver, but I do believe that the free market will crush this paper manipulation, and that anyone holding physical silver on that day will be holding a lottery ticket of real value. And finally, number 11, forget the price of silver. I think measuring silver in dollar terms is the wrong way to value silver, especially if we're talking about the end of the dollar. The thing I love about stacking silver is that regardless of the price, I know the amazing value and uses of this unique metal. Besides the gold to silver ratio, I think one of the most compelling reasons to buy silver is the historical value between silver and human labor. Throughout all of history, 1 day of hard human labor has been measured in 1/10 of an ounce of silver. This is seen in the Bible with vineyard workers and Roman soldiers being paid a denarius for every day that they worked. It is seen in Sun Tzu's Art of War. It is seen in the Industrial Age's worker pay. It is seen in even 2/3 of the world today that lives off of $2 a day. When the generational debt-based Ponzi scheme collapses, many of you would be lucky to get a silver dime for their labor, because so few of us actually do anything that produces real value. The debt-based consumer economy has warped our reality so much that hardly anyone produces any material value, other than shuffling papers and wasting time. For the cost of your cup of coffee that you're probably sipping on right now, you can buy a silver dime and have 1 day's buffer of real money from a very harsh reality. You can think of it as fat tail insurance, but I see it as the investment of a lifetime.